How to make sure you don't get back pain when performing the deadlift. You haven't got to look very far on social media to find videos like this.
To be a better deadlifter, fine. If you're not doing that for deadlift's sake, then don't fucking do it. The risk to reward ratio is a joke.
And this.
Deadlifting is valuable, but you have a narrow operating window in which you can potentially hurt yourself.
Now the argument usually centers somewhere around how it has a high risk to reward ratio, how the exercise places shear force on the spine, and because you're using heavy loads, it does cause a lot of general wear and tear. And I'm sure someone's going to jump in the comments on this post and tell me that they got injured deadlifting and that proves it's a bad exercise. Let's be really clear, you could hurt yourself doing anything. There's no such thing as an inherently bad exercise. So I'm going to go through the most common errors that people do and some coaching tips, and make sure you stay all the way through to the end when I explain to you the number one most important thing when it comes to making sure you don't get injured doing any exercise. So first of all, let's go through the most common things that go wrong on the deadlift. Number one is allowing the bar to drift too far away from the legs. I mentioned one of the issues with this exercise that people will say is the shear force it puts through the spine. So you can see what shear force does as the weight pulls forward. I have shearing force against me. So if I allow that bar to shift further out, now that shear force starts to increase. So you want to keep that bar nice and close to your shins throughout to reduce that shear force. Number two is the spinal position. You'll hear a lot of people talk about neutral spine, but the reality is we all have different natural curvatures to the spine, so there's no one correct spinal curvature to be in. But what we don't want is a large change in shape through the spine as you do the lift, either over flexing or really hard extension of the spine. Number three, this is a bottoms up exercise. The bottom of the movement is the hardest part of the position, and you have to go down there under no load and create tension at the bottom. And you'll often see people go wrong as they go to lift the weight off the floor. Now let me take you through my top technique tips. Number one is how to breathe and brace. Now this can cause some confusion. Some coaches tell people to breathe one way and other coaches tell you to breathe another way. So I'm gonna talk you through both options and tell you which one I think is more preferential. Because sometimes in deadlifting, when you're down at the bottom, people round their spine out. So it makes logical sense that if you breathe in, it helps put that stiffness in the back and helps to extend the spine. Breathing in helps to bring the rib cage up. So for anyone that naturally rounds out at the bottom, that breath in makes logical sense that might better help them. So you'd breathe in on setup, get that chest nice and high, and then lift with that breath held in and the chest high. The other option is to fully exhale. So for this, you do a mouth breath out, lock that rib cage down, and then from there, take the bar, usually with your eyes set down, and then lift from there. Generally, I say if you're a beginner or new to the exercise and you generally round out as part of your technique, maybe breathing in at first is a nice way to get that chest up. But I do think the natural evolution for most lifters is to eventually start to breathe out fully, packing that rib cage down, keeping the eye line down, and locking in the trunk from that position. But ultimately, you can try both and see which one works best for you. Number two, you might have heard about is getting the slack at the bar. As I mentioned, this is a bottoms up exercise, so you need to get tight at the bottom before lifting the weight up. That's quite a unique element to the deadlift. The last point was about breathing and bracing. That's about creating stiffness in the trunk, but we need to transfer the load from the bar into the torso to lift it through the hips. So the idea of getting the slack out the bar is to preload your body with some of the weight of the bar just before you go to lift. So I suggest to get your breathing and bracing at the top, come down, and then to get the slack out the bar, you're gonna pull that bar back in towards the legs. That gets that slack out before lifting. And note the aim is to draw the shoulders down, not back. When you're in that bottom position, you're setting the shoulders down. Imagine you're squeezing an orange underneath the armpit. So you can see by pinching the shoulder blades back, that reduces the arm length. It means I have to go lower down to get the bar. And those small muscles between the shoulder blades aren't going to hold the weight of a big barbell. So remember, we're setting the shoulders down whilst maintaining that brace. Number three is don't allow your knees to bend too much. Think of it this way, the weight just wants to go straight down, which creates a vertical line of force up and down. So if you set up with your knees too far forward, the first thing you need to do is pull the bar forward and then get it up into the hips. A much more efficient bar path is to try and go as straight as possible. So you generally want to have the knees back out of the way so you can pull straight up to the top. This is why taller lifters or someone with a longer femur might actually be better off with a trap bar setup or a sumo setup. Next is staying active in the lockout at the top. I appreciate coaches coach this differently, but I do like to coach this with an active glute squeeze at the top. The reason for this is as you're getting towards the top of the movement, if you don't squeeze the glutes and tailbone tuck, you might finish the set in a slight anterior tilt with the pelvis slightly tipped. So that might mean as you come down, the bar starts to pull you forward, or you're just really extending the spine, which might start to compress the lower back. So I think it's smart to really hump the hips at the top, and then from there, break and come back down. But again, you can try it with a glute squeeze at the top and without, and see which one feels better for you. Finally, point 5 is whether or not to dead stop or to touch and go. If you dead stop, you touch the ground, it gives you a chance to reinforce your setup every single time. Obviously you get a slight break at the bottom, but you can really focus on that lifting power off the floor. Whereas if you touch and go, you maintain bar tension in the body throughout. That's gonna be a bit more fatiguing on the grip overall, but it does maintain the muscles under tension throughout the entire range. The general rule is if you're training for strength, you would do a dead stop, and if you're training more for hypertrophy or endurance, then you would do the touch and go variation. But just a point on back pain and doing a touch and go version. If your form's not great on one rep and you take that form into the next and you never reset, maybe you'll be patterning poor technique from the first rep to the second to the third. Maybe the bar will start to drift forwards. Maybe you will lose that bar contact against the thigh. Maybe your knees start to drift too far forward. Or maybe you just lose your brace's spinal position overall. So what is the number one most important thing that you need to understand when it comes to reducing your injury risk when it comes to deadlift or any exercise? It's simply load management. Understanding that muscles and connective tissue get damaged when those structures are exposed to stresses beyond what they can tolerate. So yes, making sure you dial in your technique is important, but it's usually more important to dial in your ego, because your connective tissue and your joints respond much slower to exercise than your muscles and cardiovascular system due to blood flow and nutrient delivery. If you're training close to your technical limit on deadlift, you do need to be cautious. Very experienced lifters have put years of practice in, so they understand the lift, they know their limits, and they built some capacity around their movement overall. And the nice thing about load management overall, going slower through the loads, is small deviations in technique can be tolerated as you're building up the workload around it. What the human body doesn't like is large increases in load when then your technique starts to break down. It's not so much the technique breaking down, it's the fact it's happening in a situation where the body isn't actually used to just dealing with the variability of the movement. And I'd argue you don't really need to be trained to put a task failure during the deadlift. Very much think it as a technical lift. And then if you like training to failure on your posterior chain exercises, you can do that on things like your back extensions and your leg curls. And within this understanding of load management also becomes a conversation of warming up. Like I mentioned, the human body doesn't like you to jump up in load, but it also doesn't like it in your preparation to the exercise to be doing your top working weight really quickly. So having warm-up sets where you ramp the weight up to your working weight is a really smart way to mitigate injury. And you can use a ramping method during your working set. So if you intended to lift 100 kilos as your maximum weight, you might decide to do your first set at 92.5 kilos, your second set at 95 kilos, then your third set at 100 kilos. When you do then decide to go to 102.5 kilos, you only ever do it on one set rather than all your sets. This is a really nice way to have small exposures to large weights rather than really increasing the workload by doing all 3 sets at 102.5 kilos, which really jumps up in total workload from one workout to the next. It's also worthwhile thinking of your overall programming. The expression, the straw that broke the camel's back, is really apparent when it comes to injury. Potentially it wasn't the exercise that you were doing that you hurt yourself on that was the major issue. It was the cumulative stress of all your workouts combined and lots of training close to your limit. So thinking about your overall exercise selection, the amount of total volume you're doing in your training and how much of those exercises are really close to your max is a really smart way to make sure that your spine and other joints aren't taking too much total work. So to wrap up, the deadlift, or any exercise for that matter, is not inherently dangerous. Injuries are more likely influenced by your load management and your overall training program than it is one particular exercise. Yes, of course, you should have taken the time to understand proper exercise technique, but don't stress out about small deviations in hip or spinal position. If you manage your overall workload better, you'll build capacity and have a much more resilient body. I know I've covered a lot in this video because the reality is injuries are very complex and it's never down to one single factor. So give some of this a try. You'll find you'll be able to train pain-free and you're training for much longer. Make sure you hit subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below.